When I found my fiancée's positive pregnancy test hidden behind the bathroom mirror, with a date that proved the baby couldn't possibly be mine, I never imagined that 3 weeks later, she'd have me arrested for assault in my own driveway. Before I dive into this nightmare that nearly destroyed my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about betrayal, survival, and the strength it takes to rebuild when everything falls apart. Now let me take you back to when I still believed I was living the American dream. My name is Michael, I'm 29 years old, and until 6 months ago I thought I had it all figured out. I was working as a project manager for a construction company in Denver, Colorado, making decent money and planning my wedding to the woman I thought was my soulmate. Sarah and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months, and we were supposed to get married in just 4 months. She was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, charming, and seemingly devoted to building our future together. Our relationship seemed perfect from the outside. We had this nice little apartment downtown, split the bills evenly, and talked about kids all the time. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist and was great with people. Everyone loved her smile and her bubbly personality. My family adored her, especially my mom, who kept saying she couldn't wait for grandchildren. That's probably why I didn't notice the red flags at first. When you're in love and planning a future with someone, you tend to explain away the little inconsistencies, like how Sarah started working late more often, or how she'd get defensive when I asked simple questions about her day. She'd started keeping her phone face down during dinner and would take calls in the other room, claiming it was work stuff or drama with her sister. The first real sign something was wrong came during a family barbecue at my parents' house, about 2 months before I found that pregnancy test. My cousin Jake was there. He's about my age, works as a mechanic, and has always been the charmer of the family. He's one of those guys who can talk to anyone and make them laugh within 5 minutes. We'd grown up together, more like brothers than cousins, and I trusted him completely. That day, I noticed Sarah and Jake talking by themselves near the garden while I was helping my dad with the grill. Nothing unusual about that. Sarah got along with everyone in my family, but when I walked over to join them, they both got quiet really fast, like I'd interrupted something private. Sarah laughed it off, saying they were just talking about Jake's new truck, but something in her eyes seemed different. Nervous, maybe. Jake clapped me on the shoulder like always, and made some joke about stealing my girl, which made us all laugh. It was the kind of thing he'd said 100 times before. He was always the joker who'd flirt harmlessly with everyone's girlfriends just to get a reaction. But this time Sarah's laugh seemed a little too loud, a little too forced. I brushed it off. I had to. The alternative, that something was actually going on between my fiancé and my cousin, was unthinkable. These were the 2 people I trusted most in the world outside my immediate family. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Sarah would mention Jake in conversations more often, always casual stuff like, "Jake said this," or "Jake recommended that restaurant." She'd never paid much attention to him before, and Jake started showing up places more often, dropping by our apartment just to say hi, offering to help Sarah move some furniture when I was at work, texting her directly instead of going through me like he usually did. The thing that should have been a dead giveaway happened about 3 weeks before everything exploded. Sarah came home from work one evening wearing this necklace I'd never seen before, a delicate gold chain with a small heart pendant. When I complimented it and asked where she got it, she said she'd bought it for herself as a treat. But I knew Sarah's spending habits better than anyone. She was careful with money, almost to a fault. She wouldn't spend $100 on jewelry without mentioning it, or at least showing it to me first. I didn't say anything, but I filed it away in the growing list of things that didn't quite add up. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the new jewelry, the sudden closeness with Jake. Individually, each thing had a reasonable explanation. Together, they were starting to paint a picture I desperately didn't want to see. The worst part was how normal everything else seemed. Sarah still kissed me goodbye every morning, still talked about our wedding plans, still said, "I love you" every night before we went to sleep. She was still planning the seating arrangements and finalizing the catering menu. How could someone fake that level of normalcy while living a completely different life behind your back? I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of wedding planning and work was making me see things that weren't there. Sarah had never given me a real reason not to trust her. We'd never had any major fights about faithfulness or jealousy. She'd always been open about her friendships and her past relationships. But deep down, In that place where you know things before your brain catches up, I was starting to understand that the life I thought I was building was built on a foundation of lies. I just had no idea how deep those lies went, or how far Sarah would be willing to go to keep them buried. The truth was about to surface in the most devastating way possible, and it would nearly cost me everything: my freedom, my reputation, and my faith in the people closest to me. The morning I decided to surprise Sarah with breakfast in bed was the morning everything started to unravel, though I wouldn't realize it for another 3 weeks. I'd gotten up early on a Saturday, planning to make her favorite pancakes and coffee before she woke up. It was supposed to be romantic, a small gesture to show how much I appreciated her during what I thought was just a stressful period in our relationship. But when I went to grab her phone to put on some soft music through her Spotify, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were 17 unread text messages from Jake. 17. At 6:30 in the morning. Now Jake wasn't typically an early riser, and he definitely wasn't the type to send that many texts unless something was seriously wrong. My first thought was that there might be a family emergency I didn't know about, but something held me back from waking Sarah immediately. Maybe it was the way she'd been guarding her phone lately, or maybe it was pure instinct, but I found myself staring at that phone, wondering what could be so urgent. The messages were all marked as Jake, with a fire emoji next to his name. When had she added that emoji? I'd seen his contact in her phone before, and it had always just been his name. Small detail, but it bothered me more than it should have. I didn't read the messages, I want to be clear about that. Despite everything that happened later, I never violated her privacy by reading her texts. But I did notice the timestamps. The first message had come in at 11:47 p.m. the night before, and they'd continued until 2:30 a.m., then started up again at 6:15 a.m. Who has a conversation that urgent, that late at night with someone who isn't their partner? When Sarah woke up and saw me with her phone, she snatched it away faster than I'd ever seen her move. "What are you doing?" she asked, and there was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. "I was just going to play some music," I said. "Jake texted you a bunch of times. Is everything okay?" The look that crossed her face was pure panic, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, that. He's just being dramatic about some girl he's seeing. You know how he gets when he's drunk." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I keep telling him I'm not his relationship counselor." It was a reasonable explanation, and it should have satisfied me. Jake did have a tendency to overthink his love life, and he had asked for relationship advice before. But something about Sarah's reaction felt wrong. She was holding her phone against her chest like she was protecting it, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the little things I'd been dismissing. Sarah's work schedule had become increasingly unpredictable. She'd always been scheduled pretty consistently, but suddenly she was getting called in for emergency cleanings or staying late for inventory. When I offered to pick her up after these late shifts, she'd always have some reason why it wasn't necessary. She was getting a ride with a co-worker, or she needed to stop somewhere on the way home. Then there were the changes in her appearance and behavior. Sarah had always been naturally beautiful, but she'd started spending more time on her makeup and hair, even for casual outings. She'd bought new clothes, sexier clothes than she usually wore. When I complimented her on a new dress, she'd get almost embarrassed, like she hadn't expected me to notice. Her eating habits changed too. Sarah had always had a healthy appetite, but she started picking at her food and complaining about feeling nauseous, especially in the mornings. When I suggested she might be getting sick, she'd brush it off and say it was stress from the wedding planning. The wedding planning. That became another source of confusion. Sarah had been obsessed with every detail for months, but suddenly she seemed distant from the whole process. She'd agree to whatever I suggested without her usual enthusiasm, and she stopped bringing up the honeymoon plans we'd been so excited about. When her maid of honor called to discuss the bachelorette party, Sarah seemed almost annoyed by the conversation. But the most unsettling change was in our physical relationship. We'd always been affectionate with each other, but Sarah became almost mechanical about intimacy. She'd participate, but she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely, and she started insisting on showering immediately afterward, every single time, which wasn't her usual routine. Jake's behavior was changing too, though in different ways. He'd always been confident and joking around me, but he started acting nervous whenever the three of us were together. He'd make his usual flirtatious comments to Sarah, but now they seemed forced, like he was overcompensating for something. And he started asking weird questions about my work schedule and when I'd be out of town for projects. The coincidences were piling up in ways that were getting harder to ignore, like the time I came home early from work and found Sarah's car in the parking lot, but she wasn't in our apartment. When she came back 20 minutes later, she said she'd been doing laundry in the basement, but she wasn't carrying any laundry, and I just checked the laundry room. Or the time Jake mentioned a new restaurant downtown that he wanted to try, and Sarah immediately said she'd heard it was terrible, even though she'd never mentioned going there. But later that week, I saw a receipt in her purse from that exact restaurant, dated from a day when she was supposed to be at work. The most obvious red flag came during my mum's birthday dinner. The whole family was there, including Jake, and Sarah seemed more animated than she'd been in weeks. She was laughing at all of Jake's jokes, complimenting his new haircut, asking him about his work. At one point, she reached across the table to steal a bite from his plate, something she'd never done before, not even with me. When I raised an eyebrow, she laughed it off and said she was just really hungry. But I caught them looking at each other throughout the dinner in a way that seemed too familiar, too intimate. There were little smiles and glances that felt like they were sharing private jokes or secrets. At one point, Jake made some comment about keeping secrets, and Sarah actually blushed. After dinner, when we were all saying goodbye in the driveway, Jake hugged Sarah goodbye. Not unusual. He hugged everyone. But this hug lasted longer than it should have, and I saw him whisper something in her ear that made her pull back and look at him with an expression I couldn't read. That night I lay in bed listening to Sarah breathe beside me, and I realized I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I was planning to marry in just a few months, had become someone I didn't recognize. She was keeping secrets, telling lies and acting like a completely different person. I kept hoping I was wrong, that there was some other explanation for all these changes. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me. Maybe she was dealing with some personal issue she didn't want to burden me with. Maybe the stress of the wedding was affecting her more than she wanted to admit. But in my heart, I was starting to understand that something much worse was happening. The woman I loved was betraying me, and the cousin I'd grown up with was helping her do it. I just had no idea how deep the betrayal went, or what they were willing to do to keep it hidden. The truth was closing in, and when it finally hit, it would shatter everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. The day Sarah told me she was pregnant should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it became the day I started doing math that would destroy everything I believed about our relationship. It was a Tuesday evening in mid-March. I'd just gotten home from a particularly stressful day, dealing with a delayed project, and Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner. She seemed nervous, which wasn't unusual lately, but there was something different about her energy. She kept glancing at me with this expression I couldn't read, part excitement, part fear. "I have something to tell you," she said as we sat down to eat. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached across the table and took mine. "Michael, I'm pregnant." For a moment, I just stared at her. Then the news hit me like a wave of pure joy. We were going to have a baby. We'd talked about kids so many times, planned for them, dreamed about what they'd look like and who they'd take after. This was what we'd been working toward. I jumped up so fast I knocked over my chair and pulled her into my arms, spinning her around the kitchen, while she laughed and told me to be careful. I was ecstatic. I kept saying, "Really? Really?" like I couldn't believe it was true. Sarah was crying happy tears and nodding, and for those first few minutes everything felt perfect. "How far along are you?" I asked when we finally sat back down. "About 6 weeks," she said, and something in her voice seemed hesitant. 6 weeks. I started doing the math in my head automatically, the way you do when you're trying to figure out when something happened. 6 weeks back would put the conception around early February. I remembered early February pretty clearly because we'd had that long weekend together when I'd taken time off work and we'd barely left the apartment. It seemed right, but then I started thinking more carefully. 6 weeks from mid-March would actually be early February. But Sarah had been acting strange since January. The secretive behavior, the phone calls, the changes in her routine, all of that had started well before early February. If she was 6 weeks pregnant now, why had she been acting differently for almost 2 months? "Are you sure about the timing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Sarah's eyes darted away from mine. "Well, it's hard to be exact. Could be 6 weeks, could be 7 or 8. I haven't been to the doctor yet. 8 weeks would put conception in late January or early February. Still possible, but the math was getting hazier. And why hadn't she been to the doctor yet, if she'd known long enough to be sure she was pregnant? "When did you first suspect?" I asked. "Just a few days ago," she said quickly. "I took a test when I realized I was late." But that didn't add up either. If she'd just suspected a few days ago and taken a test, how could she be so certain about being 6 to 8 weeks along? You can't pinpoint timing that specifically from a home pregnancy test alone. I didn't voice these concerns because I didn't want to ruin the moment. This was supposed to be a celebration. We called my parents, who were over the moon, and then we called Sarah's family. Everyone was so excited, talking about baby names and nursery colors, and how the wedding would need to be moved up or modified to accommodate Sarah's pregnancy. But that night, lying in bed with Sarah sleeping beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline. I'm good with numbers. I have to be in my job, and something wasn't adding up. I tried to remember our intimate moments over the past couple of months when they'd happened, when Sarah might have conceived. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. There had been a stretch in late January where Sarah had been particularly distant physically, claiming she wasn't feeling well, and in early February she'd been traveling for work, or at least that's what she'd told me. She'd been gone for 3 days for what she said was a continuing education conference for dental hygienists. I'd never questioned it, because Sarah had never given me reason not to trust her. But now, with a baby on the way and the timeline feeling fuzzy, I started remembering other details, like how she'd been vague about the conference details when I asked about it, or how she'd seemed different when she came back, more secretive, more guarded. Over the next few days, I tried to be supportive and excited, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah seemed relieved that I'd taken the news well, but she also seemed anxious in a way that didn't match someone who'd just shared happy news with their partner. She kept bringing up practical concerns in ways that seemed almost defensive. "I know this changes our wedding timeline," she'd say, "but we can still make it work." Or, "I hope you're not disappointed that it's happening sooner than we planned." Why would I be disappointed? We'd always wanted kids. The timing was a little earlier than we'd discussed, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Her comments made it seem like she expected me to be upset about something. Then there were the phone calls. Sarah had always been somewhat private about her conversations with friends and family, but now she was taking calls in the other room constantly. "Pregnancy stuff," she'd say when I asked. "You don't want to hear about hormones and morning sickness symptoms." But I did want to hear about it. This was our baby, our experience together. Why was she treating it like something she needed to handle alone? The breaking point came about a week after her announcement. I was helping Sarah organize some paperwork when I came across a receipt from a pharmacy, dated 3 weeks before she told me she was pregnant. The receipt showed a purchase of prenatal vitamins and a pregnancy test, 3 weeks before she told me, which meant she'd known she was pregnant for at least 3 weeks before sharing the news with me. Why would she keep something like that to herself for so long? When I asked her about it, Sarah got defensive immediately. "I wasn't sure," she said. "I wanted to be certain before I got your hopes up. You know how excited you get about things." But the receipt also showed that she'd bought prenatal vitamins, which suggested she was pretty confident about being pregnant. And if she'd taken a test 3 weeks earlier, why had she told me she'd only suspected a few days ago? That night, I did more careful calculations based on the receipt date and what Sarah had told me about how far along she was. The math was becoming increasingly impossible. Either Sarah was much further along than she'd said, or the pregnancy had been confirmed much earlier than she'd admitted, or both. I started thinking about all the strange behavior over the past few months, the secrecy, the phone calls, the changes in her routine, the distance in our physical relationship. I thought about Jake's increased presence in our lives and the way he and Sarah had been acting around each other. And then, with a sick feeling in my stomach, I started thinking about timing in a completely different way. Not when Sarah might have gotten pregnant by me, but when she might have gotten pregnant by someone else. The late January period when she'd been distant, the work conference in early February, the new jewelry she couldn't explain, the secretive text messages with Jake, the way they looked at each other during family gatherings. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't let myself believe it. But the numbers were telling a story that I was finally starting to understand, and it was a story that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The woman I was planning to marry was carrying a baby that might not be mine, and I was beginning to suspect I knew exactly whose baby it was. The pregnancy test I found hidden behind our bathroom mirror 3 weeks later wasn't the one Sarah had told me about. This one was older, stuffed behind a loose tile where no one would ever look unless they were doing maintenance. The date on the package told me everything I needed to know, and everything I wished I'd never discovered. I'd only found it because we'd been dealing with a slow leak in the bathroom wall, and I'd finally decided to fix it myself, rather than wait for our landlord to call a plumber. When I removed the mirror to get to the pipes, this pregnancy test box fell out from behind it, like evidence waiting to be discovered. The test was dated January 15th, which meant Sarah had known she was pregnant for almost 2 full months before she told me. But more importantly, it meant the timing of conception was much earlier than she'd claimed. I sat on the bathroom floor holding that box, doing math that made me feel sick. If she'd gotten a positive result in mid-January, the baby had been conceived in late December or early January. I tried to remember our intimate life during that period, and my heart sank. Late December, Sarah had been distant, claiming holiday stress. We'd barely been intimate at all. Early January, she'd had that stomach bug that lasted for over a week, during which she'd slept in the guest room and avoided all physical contact. The timing windows when she could have gotten pregnant by me were incredibly narrow, but I remembered what else had happened during that period. Jake had been around more often during the holidays. He'd helped us move furniture right after New Year's. He'd been at our apartment several times when I was at work, always with some reasonable excuse, dropping off something from my parents or asking to borrow tools, or just being in the neighborhood. I sat there staring at that pregnancy test box and realized that everything I'd been trying not to believe was true. Sarah hadn't just been lying about when she found out she was pregnant. She'd been lying about everything. My hands were shaking as I put the test back where I'd found it and replaced the mirror. I needed more proof before I could confront her. I needed to be absolutely certain, because once I accused her of this, there would be no going back. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to details I'd been ignoring. I looked through our credit card statements and found charges I couldn't account for. Hotel stays on days when Sarah was supposed to be at work, restaurant bills for 2 people when I'd been out of town, purchases at stores Sarah never shopped at, in parts of town she had no reason to visit. I checked our phone records and found patterns that made my stomach turn. Long calls to Jake's number during work hours, when Sarah should have been with patients. Text message volumes that were astronomical. Hundreds of messages back and forth, sometimes late at night, sometimes during times when I thought Sarah was sleeping next to me. The most damning evidence came from Sarah's social media. She'd always been careful about her privacy settings, but I knew her passwords because we'd shared them when we got engaged. We'd had no secrets then, or so I'd thought. Going through her private messages was a violation of her privacy, and I knew it. But I also knew I was looking at the potential destruction of my entire life, and I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The messages with Jake went back months. At first, they'd been innocent enough. Family gossip, jokes, casual conversation. But sometime in November, the tone had shifted. They'd become more frequent, more personal, more intimate. There were conversations about feelings and attraction, messages about how complicated everything was, references to times they'd spent together that I knew nothing about. And then, in December, the messages became unmistakably romantic. I found messages where they talked about being together, where Jake called her pet names I'd never heard him use, where Sarah expressed doubts about our relationship and Jake encouraged those doubts, where they made plans to meet when I wouldn't be around. The worst messages were from early January, right around the time Sarah would have gotten pregnant. Jake talking about how much he cared about her. Sarah saying she'd never felt this way about anyone before. Both of them discussing how to handle the situation with me. And then in late January, everything changed. The messages became panicked, urgent, full of references to a problem they needed to figure out. Sarah mentioning being late and Jake promising to take care of everything. Plans for her to take a test, and then Jake's relief when she confirmed she was pregnant, followed immediately by panic about what to do next. I found the message where they decided Sarah should tell me the baby was mine, where Jake promised to stay away so I wouldn't suspect anything, where Sarah worried about the timing, and Jake assured her that she could make the math work if she was careful about what she told me. There were dozens of messages about their plan, how Sarah should act surprised by the pregnancy, how they should behave around each other in public, what Sarah should say if I asked too many questions. They'd choreographed the entire deception, but the messages also revealed something else. They were both terrified. Jake kept talking about how much he respected me and how awful he felt about betraying me. Sarah kept expressing doubts about whether they could pull it off. They both seemed to understand that what they were doing would destroy me if I found out. The most recent messages, from just a few days earlier, were about damage control. Jake was worried that I was getting suspicious. Sarah was panicking about small inconsistencies in her story. They were both talking about what would happen if I discovered the truth. Jake had written, If he finds out, he's going to hate both of us forever. Our families will be destroyed. His parents love you like a daughter. Sarah had replied, he can't find out. Whatever it takes, he can't find out. I won't lose everything because of one mistake. One mistake. That's how she was characterizing months of lying and cheating with my own cousin. One mistake that resulted in a pregnancy and an elaborate plan to pass the baby off as mine. I sat in my car in a parking lot reading these messages, feeling like my entire world was collapsing. The woman I'd planned to marry had been living a double life. The cousin I'd grown up with had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, and they'd both been working together to trick me into raising Jake's baby as my own. But what terrified me most was that last message from Sarah about doing whatever it takes to keep me from finding out. The desperation in her words suggested that she'd go to extreme lengths to protect her secret. I had no idea how extreme those lengths would be, or how dangerous Sarah would become when she realized that despite all their planning, I'd figured out the truth. The confrontation was inevitable now, but I was about to learn that cornering a desperate person who has everything to lose is one of the most dangerous things you can do. I waited until a Saturday morning when I knew we'd have privacy and time to talk. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee, humming softly, and acting like everything was normal. She was wearing the necklace again, the one Jake had clearly given her, and the sight of it made my decision final. We need to talk, I said, sitting down at the kitchen table. Something in my tone must have alerted her because she turned around immediately, and I saw fear flash across her face before she composed herself. What about? She asked, but her voice was too casual, too controlled. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. I'd screenshot several of the messages between her and Jake. Not all of them, because I couldn't handle seeing all of that betrayal displayed at once, but enough to make my point clear. I know about Jake, I said quietly. I know about everything. Sarah went completely still. The coffee mug in her hand started shaking, and I watched the color drain from her face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I don't know what you think you know, she finally said, but... Sarah, stop. I turned my phone so she could see the screen. I've read your messages. I found the pregnancy test you hid. I've seen the credit card charges and the hotel receipts. I know the baby isn't mine. She sank into the chair across from me like her legs couldn't support her anymore. The coffee mug fell from her hands and shattered on the floor, but neither of us moved to clean it up. Michael, I can explain, she whispered. Explain what? How you've been cheating on me with my cousin for months. How you got pregnant by him and decided to trick me into thinking it was my baby. How you've been lying to my face every single day while planning our wedding. Tears started streaming down her face, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her. The woman sitting across from me had become a stranger. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said. It started as friendship and then it became something else. I never meant for any of this to happen, but it did happen. And instead of telling me the truth, you decided to destroy my life. I was scared, she sobbed. I knew if you found out, you'd leave me. I knew everyone would hate me. My parents, your parents, everyone. I just wanted to make it work. Make it work? Sarah, you were going to let me raise another man's child thinking it was mine. You were going to let me live my entire life based on a lie. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. The baby could still be yours. I mean, there's a chance. Stop lying. My voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. I know exactly when you got pregnant, and I know it wasn't by me. You've been caught. At least have the dignity to stop lying now. For a moment, something changed in her expression. The tears stopped, and she looked at me with an emotion I couldn't identify. It wasn't shame or guilt anymore. It was something colder. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. The wedding is off, obviously. You need to move out. I'll give you time to find a place, but I can't have you here anymore. And Jake? Jake is dead to me. I never want to see him again. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring down at the broken coffee mug. When she spoke again, her voice was different, flatter, more calculated. You realize this will destroy both our families, she said. Your parents adore me. They've been planning this wedding for months. They're so excited about being grandparents. That's not my problem anymore. It will be your problem when everyone finds out why you broke off the engagement. People will ask questions. They'll want to know what happened. There was something in her tone that I didn't like. It sounded almost like a threat. Let them ask questions. I'll tell them the truth. Will you? She looked up at me and her eyes were completely cold now, because that's going to hurt a lot of people who don't deserve to be hurt. Your parents will be devastated. Jake's parents will be devastated. Everyone at work who's been excited about the wedding will want to know why it's off. Sarah, what are you saying? She stood up and started pacing around the kitchen, stepping carefully around the broken mug. I'm saying that maybe there's a way to handle this that doesn't destroy everyone's lives. There's no way to handle this. You cheated on me with my cousin and got pregnant. There's no coming back from that. But there could be. She turned to face me, and I saw a look in her eyes that I'd never seen before. It was manipulation, pure and calculated. Think about it, Michael. If you break off the engagement now, everyone's going to be hurt and confused. But if we just postpone things, give me some time to figure out how to make this right. Make this right? How could you possibly make this right? I could end things with Jake. I could tell him it's over. I could focus completely on our relationship and make it work. I stared at her in disbelief. You're pregnant with his baby. Babies need fathers. You'd be a good father, better than Jake would be. The audacity of what she was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just asking me to forgive her cheating, she was asking me to participate actively in the deception, to knowingly raise Jake's child while pretending it was mine. You're insane, I said. Her expression hardened. I'm practical. Think about what you're throwing away, Michael. We've built a life together. We have plans, dreams, a future. Are you really going to destroy all of that because of one mistake? One mistake that resulted in you carrying another man's baby. Fine. Her voice turned sharp. Be angry, be self-righteous. But think about the consequences, really think about them. There was definitely a threat in her voice now, and it was making me uncomfortable. What consequences? Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. Well, for instance, people might wonder why you're really breaking off the engagement. They might start asking questions about your behavior, your character. They might wonder what you did to drive your fiancé away. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I could tell a very different story about why our relationship ended. A story about anger and control and behavior that made me feel unsafe. I felt like she'd slapped me. You're threatening to lie about me. I'm pointing out that there are multiple ways to tell this story, and you might not like all of them. We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I realized I was looking at someone I'd never really known. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd planned to marry, had never actually existed. This person, cold, calculating, willing to destroy innocent people to protect herself, this was who Sarah really was. Get out, I said quietly. Michael, get out of my apartment. Get out now before I do something I'll regret. Sarah stood there for another moment, studying my face like she was calculating her next move. Then she nodded slowly. I'll pack some things, she said. But this conversation isn't over. As she walked toward our bedroom, I heard her add quietly, You have no idea what you're starting. I should have paid more attention to those words. I should have understood that Sarah wasn't just threatening me. She was promising me that if I destroyed her life, she'd destroy mine right back. But I was too angry, too hurt, too focused on the betrayal to understand that I'd just declared war on someone who was willing to fight much dirtier than I ever imagined. The first sign that Sarah was planning something came 2 days after she moved out. I'd been trying to process everything, calling in sick to work because I couldn't focus on anything except the complete destruction of my life. That's when my phone started ringing with calls that made no sense. First, it was my mom. Michael, honey, Sarah called me. She's very upset. She says you two had a fight, but she won't tell me what it's about. Are you okay? Then my dad. Son, your mother is worried sick. Sarah sounded terrible when she called. She said she might have to stay with friends for a while because you needed space. What's going on? Then my supervisor at work. Hey, Michael, your fiancé called the office. She sounded pretty shaken up. Said there was some kind of family emergency, and you might need some time off. Everything all right? Sarah was calling everyone in my life, planting seeds of a story I didn't understand yet. She wasn't telling them specifics, but she was making sure everyone knew that something was wrong between us, and that she was the one who seemed upset and displaced. When Jake called, I almost didn't answer, but I needed to know what role he was playing in whatever Sarah was planning. Mike, man, we need to talk, he said, and he sounded genuinely distraught. Sarah told me you found out about us. I'm so sorry, man. I know I fucked up. I know I betrayed you. Yeah, you did. Can we meet somewhere? Can I explain what happened? I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. There's nothing to explain, Jake. You slept with my fiancée. She's pregnant with your baby. End of story. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. There was a long pause. Mike, she's not handling this well. She's saying some things that are worrying me. What kind of things? She's talking about how angry you were when you confronted her. She says you scared her. She's telling people you have a temper problem. My blood went cold. I never raised my voice at her. I never even stood up from the table. I know, man. I know you. But she's painting a different picture, and she's really good at making people believe her. That night, I got a call from Sarah's best friend, Monica. We'd always gotten along well, and she'd been one of Sarah's bridesmaids. "Michael, I just wanted to check on you," she said, but her tone was strange, careful. "Sarah told me you two are having some problems." That's one way to put it. "She's staying with me right now. She's pretty shaken up. She said you found out about some text messages with Jake, and you got really angry." "She told you about the text messages?" "She said they were just friendly messages, but that you interpreted them wrong and accused her of cheating. She said you were so angry that she got scared and left." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah was rewriting the entire story, making herself the victim and me the aggressor. She was telling people just enough truth to make the lies believable. "Monica, that's not what happened. I'm not taking sides," she said quickly. "I just want you both to be okay. Maybe you should talk to someone, though, like a counselor or something. Sarah mentioned that you've been under a lot of stress lately with work and the wedding planning." After I hung up, I realized what Sarah was doing. She was building a narrative where I was unstable, jealous, and potentially dangerous. She was reaching out to everyone in my life, positioning herself as the frightened victim who'd had to flee from her violent fiancé. But the most chilling call came the next day from my own cousin Jake. "Mike, Sarah came to see me," he said, and he sounded terrified. "She's asking me to back up her story about what happened between you two." "What story?" "She wants me to tell people that I've seen you get angry before, that you have a temper, that I was worried about her safety even before this happened." "And are you going to do that?" "Fuck no." "But Mike, she's not stable right now. She's desperate, and desperate people do crazy things. She told me that if I don't support her version of events, she'll tell my parents and your parents about the baby. She'll destroy my family to save herself. She's threatening you too. She's threatening everyone. She said she has other options if I don't cooperate. She mentioned something about having evidence that you were abusive during your relationship." "What evidence? I was never abusive." "I know that, but she's talking about creating evidence, photos, recordings, witnesses, who might be willing to say they saw things." I felt sick. Sarah wasn't just lying about what had happened. She was actively planning to frame me for things that had never happened. "Jake, I need you to tell me everything she said. She said that if she's going down, she's taking you with her. She said you destroyed her life, so she's going to destroy yours. She's been researching what happens to men who get accused of domestic violence, how it affects their jobs, their reputations, their relationships with family. This is insane. Mike, she showed me pictures on her phone, pictures of bruises on her arms and face. She said she knows how to make them look real." My hands were shaking as I absorbed what Jake was telling me. Sarah wasn't just planning to lie about me. She was planning to frame me for assault. She was going to claim I'd been abusive throughout our relationship and that she'd left because she feared for her safety. "There's more," Jake said quietly. "She's been asking me about your schedule, when you're home, when you're at work, when you'll be alone. She said she might need to document some evidence of your threatening behavior. She's planning to stage something. That's what I'm afraid of. Mike, you need to be careful. Don't be alone with her. Don't respond to her calls or texts. And maybe you should talk to a lawyer." "A lawyer? If she's planning to accuse you of assault, you're going to need legal help. This could destroy your career, your reputation, everything." After Jake hung up, I sat in my apartment realizing that my life was about to become a nightmare I'd never imagined. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd planned to marry, was systematically planning to destroy me because I'd discovered her affair. She wasn't just going to lie about what had happened between us. She was going to create false evidence, manipulate witnesses, and build a case that would make me look like an abusive monster. She was willing to destroy my career, my relationships with family and friends, and my reputation in the community. And the worst part was that she was probably going to succeed. Sarah was charming, sympathetic, and believable. She had people's trust and affection. When she told them I'd been abusive, they'd believe her. I was about to become the target of an elaborate frame job by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate the people and systems around her. And I had no idea how to protect myself from someone who was willing to go that far to avoid facing the consequences of her own actions. The real nightmare was just beginning. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday night. I was barely awake when I heard Sarah's voice, panicked and sobbing, but something about it sounded wrong, too performed, too calculated. "Michael, Please, I need to talk to you, she cried into the phone. I'm scared. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I made a terrible mistake. Can you please come over? I'm at Monica's house. Every instinct I had told me this was a trap, but her voice sounded so desperate, so genuinely terrified, that for a moment I almost wavered. Almost. Sarah, it's the middle of the night. Whatever you want to say can wait until tomorrow. Please, she sobbed. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I keep thinking about how I hurt you, and I just need to apologize properly. Face to face, I owe you that much. We have nothing more to talk about. Michael, please, just give me 15 minutes. Let me explain what really happened with Jake. Let me tell you the truth about everything. I was about to hang up when she said something that made my blood freeze. I know you hate me right now, but I'm carrying a baby. Your baby. No matter what you think, there's still a chance this baby is yours, and I can't handle the stress of this fight anymore. It's not good for the baby. She was still lying, still trying to manipulate me, but now she was using the pregnancy, Jake's baby, as leverage. The audacity of it made me furious. Sarah, the baby isn't mine, and you know it. How can you be so sure, she whispered. How can you be willing to risk abandoning your own child? I hung up and turned off my phone, but 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Sarah standing in the hallway, visibly pregnant now, tears streaming down her face. She looked genuinely distraught, but I remembered Jake's warning about her ability to manipulate people. I'm not opening the door, I called through it. Michael, please. I drove all the way over here. I just need 5 minutes. Go home, Sarah. I can't go home. I don't have a home anymore because of what I did. I'm staying with friends, sleeping on couches, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life. She was using every manipulation tactic she could think of. Guilt, sympathy, the pregnancy, the idea that she was homeless and vulnerable. But I held firm. That's not my problem. Fine, she said, and suddenly her voice changed. The crying stopped, and when she spoke again, her tone was cold and clear. But you should know that Monica is in her car downstairs, and she can hear everything you're saying to me. She's recording this conversation on her phone. My heart stopped. Sarah had brought a witness, someone who could testify that I'd refused to help a pregnant woman in distress, someone who could record me sounding angry and unsympathetic. She can hear how cruel you're being to me, Sarah continued, raising her voice slightly. How you're refusing to even talk to me when I'm begging for help. I realized this entire late-night visit was staged. Sarah had brought Monica as a witness to document my hostile behavior toward my pregnant ex-fiancée. Every word I said was being recorded and could be taken out of context later. Please, Michael, Sarah said loudly enough for Monica to hear clearly. I know you're angry about the messages with Jake, but they weren't what you think. I can explain everything if you'll just let me in for 5 minutes. She was creating a narrative for the recording, making it sound like our breakup was about innocent messages that I'd misinterpreted, not about months of cheating and a pregnancy. Just give me a chance to make this right, she continued. I love you. I want to marry you. I want us to raise this baby together. I stayed silent, realizing that anything I said could be twisted and used against me. Sarah kept talking for several more minutes, alternating between sounding heartbroken and frightened, always speaking loudly enough for Monica to record every word. Finally, she left, but not before saying, I guess you've made your decision. I just hope you can live with yourself for abandoning me and your baby when I needed you most. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. Michael, what is going on with you and Sarah? Monica called me this morning. She said Sarah came to see you last night and you wouldn't even open the door. She said Sarah was crying and begging you to talk to her, and you were cold and mean. Mom, there are things about Sarah that you don't know. What things? Monica said you're accusing Sarah of cheating because of some text messages with Jake. But honey, Sarah would never cheat on you. She loves you, and she's pregnant with your baby. The baby isn't mine. There was a long silence. Michael, what are you saying? I'm saying Sarah has been lying to everyone about everything. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have proof? I realized I couldn't explain the proof without admitting I'd read Sarah's private messages, which would make me look like the controlling, paranoid fiancée Sarah was painting me as. I have proof, but it's complicated. Honey, Monica played me a recording of last night. You sounded so angry, so cold. That's not the son I raised. Sarah's plan was working perfectly. She was using her friend to spread her version of events to my own family, complete with audio evidence of me sounding unsympathetic to a crying pregnant woman. Over the next few days, more people called. Sarah's version of our breakup was spreading through our social circle like wildfire. She was telling people that I'd accused her of cheating based on innocent text messages, that I'd refused to believe the baby was mine, and that I'd become hostile and threatening when she tried to work things out. But the real bombshell came when Jake called me in a panic. "Mike, Sarah came to see me again. She had a camera crew with her." "What? Not a real camera crew. Her cousin with a video camera. She staged this whole scene where she came to my apartment crying, begging me to tell her what she should do about your threatening behavior. She filmed me comforting her, trying to calm her down. Why would she do that? Because now she has video evidence of her coming to me for help because she's afraid of you. She made sure the camera caught her bruises." "What bruises?" "Mike, she had bruises on her face and arms. Fresh ones. And they looked real." My stomach dropped. She gave herself bruises? Or had someone else do it? But in the video it looks like she came to me for help because her fiancé had been beating her. I realized Sarah's plan was far more sophisticated than I'd imagined. She wasn't just spreading rumors and manipulating conversations. She was creating actual evidence, recordings, videos, physical injuries that would support her claim that I was abusive. "There's more," Jake said quietly. "She told me she's going to file a police report. She says she has enough evidence now to prove you've been abusing her throughout your relationship. Evidence of things that never happened. Evidence that looks real. Audio recordings, video testimony, physical injuries, witnesses who will say they were worried about her safety. Mike, she's built a case against you." I hung up and realized that everything I'd feared was happening. Sarah wasn't just trying to avoid the consequences of her affair. She was actively trying to destroy my life as revenge for discovering her betrayal. She was going to have me arrested for assault. She was going to claim I'd been abusing her throughout our relationship, and she had enough fake evidence to make her story believable. The woman I'd once loved was about to frame me for crimes I'd never committed, and I had no idea how to prove my innocence against someone who'd planned her attack so carefully. The police came to my apartment on a Friday morning while I was getting ready for work. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking serious and professional. I knew immediately why they were there, but seeing them at my door still felt like a punch to the gut. "Michael Thompson?" the male officer asked. "Yes. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding an assault complaint filed against you." My hands were shaking as I grabbed my jacket and keys. Everything Jake had warned me about was happening exactly as Sarah had planned. She'd actually filed charges against me. The ride to the police station was surreal. I kept thinking about how my life had been completely normal just a few months ago, and now I was in the back of a police car, accused of crimes I'd never committed by the woman I'd planned to marry. At the station, they put me in an interview room and read me my rights. The detective who questioned me was a woman in her 40s who seemed professional, but clearly believed she was dealing with a domestic abuser. "Mr. Thompson, Sarah Mitchell has filed charges against you for assault and harassment. She's provided us with substantial evidence of a pattern of abusive behavior throughout your relationship. Would you like to tell us your side of the story?" "There is no pattern of abusive behavior because I never abused her. She has recordings of you being verbally aggressive with her. She has photographs of injuries you allegedly caused. She has witness statements from people who say they observed your controlling and threatening behavior." I felt sick listening to the detective list Sarah's fabricated evidence. "Detective, those recordings are taken out of context. Those injuries are fake. Those witnesses are lying or being misled." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Thompson. Are you saying that Ms. Mitchell and multiple witnesses are all conspiring against you?" When she put it like that, it sounded impossible, even to me. Who would believe that a sweet, pregnant dental hygienist had orchestrated an elaborate frame job against her innocent fiancé? I know how it sounds, but that's exactly what's happening. Sarah has been cheating on me with my cousin. She's pregnant by him, not by me. When I found out and confronted her, she threatened to destroy my life if I exposed her affair. The detective looked skeptical. "Do you have any proof of this alleged affair?" "I have text messages between them." "Text messages that you obtained how?" I realized the trap immediately. I read her private messages. "So you admit to violating her privacy, monitoring her communications without her consent?" Everything I said to defend myself made me sound worse. Reading Sarah's messages made me look controlling and paranoid. Accusing her of faking injuries made me sound delusional. Claiming she was framing me made me sound like every abuser who blames the victim. "Detective, I understand how this looks, but I'm telling you the truth. Sarah is lying. Mr. Thompson, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've heard every excuse, every denial, every conspiracy theory. Abusive men always claim their victims are lying. They held me for 6 hours while they processed the complaint. During that time, my phone was confiscated, my apartment was searched, and my employer was contacted. By the time I was released on bail, my entire life had been turned upside down. The conditions of my bail were devastating. I couldn't contact Sarah directly or indirectly. I couldn't go within 500 feet of her workplace, her temporary residence, or any place she might reasonably be expected to visit. I had to surrender my passport, and I had to attend anger management classes. When I finally got home, I found messages from my boss saying I was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. Messages from friends expressing shock and disappointment. Messages from family members asking if the charges were true. But the worst call was from my father. "Son, I just heard about the arrest. Please tell me this is all some kind of misunderstanding." "Dad, it is a misunderstanding. Sarah is lying about everything." "Michael, the police don't arrest people without evidence. They said she has recordings, photographs, witnesses, all fabricated. Dad, you know me. You know I would never hurt a woman." "I thought I knew you, but Sarah is such a sweet girl. Why would she make something like this up?" That's when I realized Sarah's plan was working perfectly. She'd positioned herself as the sympathetic victim, pregnant, abandoned, abused, while making me look like a dangerous man who'd fooled everyone around him. I hired a lawyer with the last of my savings. David Chen was a criminal defense attorney who specialized in domestic violence cases. When I explained the situation, he looked grim. "This is a tough case," he said. "False accusations of domestic violence are rare, and when they do happen, they're very difficult to prove. Juries tend to believe victims, especially pregnant victims. But she's not a victim. She's the one destroying my life." "That may be true, but she's built a compelling case. Audio recordings, physical evidence, witness testimony. It's exactly what prosecutors look for in domestic violence cases." "What about the text messages proving she was cheating? Obtained illegally by violating her privacy. Probably not admissible in court, and even if they were, they just make you look controlling and paranoid." I felt hopeless. "So what do I do?" "We need to find holes in her story, inconsistencies in her timeline, witnesses who can contradict her claims, evidence that she had motive to frame you. Jake will testify that she's lying. He was part of the affair. Jake is also implicated in the affair. His testimony won't be credible because he has every reason to support your version of events to save himself." Over the next few weeks, David and I worked to build my defense, but it felt like fighting quicksand. Every piece of evidence we tried to present could be interpreted as confirming Sarah's narrative about my controlling, abusive behavior. The hardest part was watching my reputation disintegrate. Word of the charges spread through my professional network. Old friends started avoiding me. Family members questioned everything they thought they knew about me. But then, 3 weeks before my trial date, David called with news that would change everything. "Michael, I think we caught a break. Remember how you said Sarah claimed to be staying with her friend Monica?" "Yeah. Well, I hired a private investigator to verify some details of her story. Turns out Monica was out of town during 2 of the incidents Sarah claims happened at her house." "What does that mean?" "It means Sarah lied about where she was when she says you were threatening her. If we can prove she lied about that, we can start unraveling the rest of her story." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Sarah had been so confident in her lies that she'd gotten careless with the details. And that carelessness might be the key to exposing the truth and saving my life. But I had no idea that Sarah had one final, desperate card to play, one that would be more dangerous than anything she'd tried before. The breakthrough in my case came from the most unexpected source, Sarah herself. In her desperation to strengthen her fabricated story, she made the one mistake that would expose everything she'd done. It happened 3 days before my trial was set to begin. Sarah filed an additional police report, claiming that I had violated the restraining order by driving past her workplace and shouting threats at her from my car. She even provided security camera footage that she claimed showed my vehicle. The problem was that David's private investigator had been tracking my movements as part of building my defense. On the day and time Sarah claimed I was harassing her at work, I was at a court-mandated anger management class with 30 witnesses and a sign-in sheet to prove it. When David presented this evidence to the prosecutor, everything started to unravel. "If she lied about this incident," David explained to me after his meeting with the DA, "the prosecutor has to question everything else she's claimed. They're reopening the investigation." The new investigation revealed cracks in Sarah's story that the police had missed the first time. The private investigator David hired discovered that the hotel receipts I'd found weren't just proof of Sarah's affair. They also contradicted her timeline of when the alleged abuse had occurred. According to Sarah's statement, I had supposedly pushed her down the stairs on a specific date in February, causing bruises on her back and arms. But the hotel records show that on that exact date, Sarah had been checked into a hotel with Jake, 200 miles away from our apartment. She got sloppy, David explained. She was so focused on creating evidence for recent incidents that she forgot to check her story against the evidence of her affair. The prosecutor assigned a different detective to re-examine the case. Detective Rivera was older, more experienced, and more skeptical than the first detective who'd interviewed me. When Rivera questioned Jake, something interesting happened. Sarah had been counting on Jake to stay quiet because admitting to the affair would destroy his own life. But facing the possibility that I might go to prison for crimes I didn't commit, Jake's conscience finally kicked in. "I can't let an innocent man go to jail," he told Detective Rivera. "Sarah and I were having an affair. The baby is mine. And she told me she was going to frame Michael for assault because he found out about us." Jake's confession opened the floodgates. He provided Detective Rivera with copies of all his text messages with Sarah, including the ones where she had explicitly discussed her plan to fabricate evidence against me. But the most damning evidence came when Rivera examined the metadata on the photos Sarah had provided as proof of her injuries. The photos had been taken with a smartphone, and the metadata showed exactly when and where each photo was created. The photos of bruises on Sarah's face had been taken at 3:47 a.m., just 4 hours before she filed her police report. The photos of bruises on her arms had been taken 2 days earlier at an address that turned out to be a makeup artist's studio that specialized in special effects for local theater productions. When confronted with this evidence, the makeup artist admitted that Sarah had paid her to create realistic-looking bruises for what Sarah claimed was a theater project. The audio recordings Sarah had provided were similarly debunked. An audio expert analyzed the files and found evidence of editing and manipulation. The conversation where I supposedly sounded threatening had been pieced together from multiple different conversations, taken out of context and rearranged to create a narrative that had never actually occurred. 3 weeks after the new investigation began, all charges against me were dropped. But Sarah's legal troubles were just beginning. The prosecutor charged Sarah with filing false police reports, perjury, evidence tampering and conspiracy. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The fabricated photos, the manipulated audio, the testimony from Jake and the makeup artist, the hotel records that contradicted her timeline. At her arraignment, Sarah looked nothing like the confident, manipulative woman who had tried to destroy my life. She was visibly pregnant, crying, and clearly terrified of the consequences of her actions. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was a victim herself, a pregnant woman who had panicked when her affair was discovered and made poor decisions while under emotional distress. But the evidence of her elaborate planning made it impossible to portray her actions as impulsive mistakes. Sarah ultimately pled guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, suspended to 6 months with 3 years of probation. She was also required to pay restitution for my legal fees and ordered to complete community service. Jake lost his job when the affair became public knowledge. His relationship with our family was permanently destroyed, and his reputation in our small community was ruined. But unlike Sarah, he had at least tried to do the right thing when it mattered most. The aftermath was both liberating and devastating. I was cleared of all charges, but the damage to my reputation took much longer to repair. Some people never fully believed my innocence, despite the evidence. Others felt guilty for doubting me and overcompensated with sympathy I didn't want. I had to rebuild my life from scratch. I found a new job in a different city, started over with new friends and colleagues who didn't know my history. The trust issues took longer to heal. It was years before I could enter into another serious relationship, and even then I found myself constantly watching for signs of deception. But perhaps the most important outcome was the perspective I gained about the justice system and false accusations. I learned how easy it is for someone with no criminal history and a sympathetic story to manipulate law enforcement and destroy an innocent person's life. I also learned something about human nature that I wish I hadn't needed to learn. People you trust completely, a romantic partner, a family member, a close friend, can be capable of betrayals you never imagined possible. And when cornered, Desperate people will go to lengths that seem unthinkable to protect themselves. Sarah gave birth to Jake's baby while serving her sentence. The child, a daughter, was placed in the custody of Jake's sister while Sarah completed her jail time. I never found out what kind of relationship, if any, Jake has with his daughter now. As for me, I eventually found love again with someone who appreciated my caution and understood my need for complete honesty and transparency. We've been married for 3 years now, and we have a son together. Sometimes I look at him and think about the child that Sarah tried to pass off as mine, and I feel grateful that the truth came out when it did. The experience taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for the truth, even when it's costly, even when it's painful, even when the people you love are hurt by it. If I had let Sarah's manipulation succeed, if I had chosen to ignore her affair and raise Jake's child as my own, I would have been living a lie for the rest of my life. Instead, I chose to fight for the truth, and eventually, the truth won out. It nearly destroyed me in the process, but it also freed me to build a life based on honesty rather than deception. Looking back, I realized that discovering Sarah's betrayal was actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time. It showed me who she really was before I married her, before I committed my entire life to someone who was capable of such calculated cruelty. The woman I thought I loved had never really existed, but the life I built after her lies were exposed. That life is real, honest, and worth fighting for. Sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one you trust completely. Trust your instincts, stand up for the truth, and never let anyone convince you to live a lie, no matter how much easier it might seem in the moment.